Hello, it's me, the anti-Black Barbie, the all-watchful eye of anti-Blackness. So, the other day, I was scrolling on the timeline and I noticed this photo of this woman going viral. And I, for the life of me, could not understand why she was getting so much backlash. After doing a little bit of research, it came to my attention that this person in this photo is actually Glorilla. If you're not exactly sure who Glorilla is, she is a popular hip hop artist who is increasingly becoming more popular as time goes on. And I'm not gonna lie to you all, I definitely have listened to a few of her songs, and there's some good stuff in there, but I have just recently been distancing myself from her because there's just been a lot of questionable behavior that I don't align myself with. And I'll highlight a few of those reasons a little bit later, but to stay on topic, this photo is very alarming to me. And maybe I'm being dramatic, but this does not look like Glorilla. Over time, we've seen her shift from what she originally looked like to what we're seeing in front of us now. I'm all here for people making enhancements and trying to become the best version of themselves, but at what point do we deviate so far from what we look like that we don't essentially lose ourselves in the process? And this video isn't even necessarily about Glorilla as a person, but more so about highlighting a larger cultural issue that is plaguing our community. I think that a big part of why this situation is capturing my attention, we don't really get to discuss how important Featurism and something like Texturism is within the Black community. And I think that a big part of why that's happening is we can barely get people to agree on colorism. So having more layered conversations about things like Featurism and Texturism tend to get overlooked when they're actually very important aspects within our community. Even though Glorilla is somebody who benefits from colorism, she is not someone who has been afforded the same privileges when it comes to Texturism and Featurism. So while some people may prop her up on a pedestal because of her skin tone, she's not typically going to have the same level of protection that someone like an Ice Spice or a Lotto has. And this is very evident when you see the way that people talk about her. Glorilla, being someone who is considered unattractive, is constantly at the forefront of these conversations. And I bring all of this up to say that I don't think that it's a coincidence that we're seeing her strip herself of her Afrocentric features in order to advertise herself to a more Eurocentric audience. I don't know for certain how much work she's had done, and I don't necessarily want to speculate too much into that, but I do know that she's come online and hinted at having a nose job, so I wouldn't be shocked if she decided to have other cosmetic surgeries. And I don't want people to think that I'm singling Glorilla out, because this behavior is not exclusive to her. We can go back and analyze someone as prominent as Little Kim and understand that there are a lot of parallels within what's happening with Glorilla. I tried doing a little bit of research to have a better understanding of what Glorilla's parents look like. I was only able to find pictures of her dad, who I consider to be medium brown, so I kind of lean in the direction of her being biracial or multiracial based off what she looks like. However, she very well could just be someone who is a lighter skinned person. And as I said before, while she does have plenty of advantages over unambiguously Black people, when it comes to competing with people in her own demographic, she's typically going to end up falling short, because most of the people who are gravitating towards her are probably colorists, so more than likely they're going to have certain expectations when it comes to the features that they're looking for. And I'm not trying to be shady, but I can see why Glorilla got some work done, because if we're just being honest, she's not necessarily the most conventionally attractive person, and I genuinely think that after one or two things she looked fine, but to see her get to this level of extreme is very concerning. One other thing that I felt like was really important to highlight was how gendered colorism and texturism and featurism are. While there are still some issues when it comes to the men, them having a large nose or textured hair or certain eye colors doesn't necessarily lower their market value in the same way that it does the women's. When interracial marriage became legal, a lot of Black men jumped at the chance to get with non-Black women, which forced a lot of Black women in a very precarious situation where you either put this blonde wig on your head and these blue contacts in your eyes, or a large part of the men were simply not going to be interested. Because prior to interracial marriage and dating becoming a thing, they were already prioritizing mixed race women who looked like Glorilla. So once they gained access to a larger dating pool, it more than likely became harder for someone like Glorilla to be able to compete. Black women, on the other hand, have a much higher sense of race loyalty, and rather than jumping at the chance to participate in eugenics, a lot of them have leaned into embracing a lot of the men's features, which has inadvertently put them in a very dangerous situation, because not only are you limiting yourself to one demographic that doesn't want you, you've also stripped a large portion of your agency by acquiescing to Eurocentric beauty standards. And at no point am I suggesting that more people should swirl, but I'm more so highlighting how we got here. I don't personally know what the right answer is in this situation, and it's generally unfair for a lot of people to have to think about, but at the very least, I don't think that I would give up so much of my agency to acquiesce to a group that's not appreciating me. And I think it really goes to show that these conversations around colorism, around featurism, around texturism are not being had enough or in a productive manner that would positively impact our community. Instead, we're seeing so many Black people lean into these very racist, anti-Black beauty standards while also actively contributing to these issues. And I think the really sad part is a lot of Black people will put in colored contacts or dye their hair platinum blonde or bleach their skin because they notice the level of attention that they're receiving in comparison to when they don't. Because doing these little things is a way to exotify yourself and to add a certain level of social currency that you as an unambiguous Black person more than likely wouldn't have. I have noticed that a lot of people have this habit of reducing the importance of Featurism and something like Texturism down to people being jealous or bitter, when in reality it impacts so many aspects of people's lives. It shows up even in the most basic things like the workforce. If you show up to a job interview with braids in your hair, or if you decided you wanted to sport an afro, you're less likely to get hired over somebody who may possess naturally straight hair, or if they decide to wear a wig or contacts that are more accepting from a Eurocentric society. When I was thinking about all of this, I couldn't help but think back to this Patti LaBelle interview that I'm going to play for you all. Okay, so pause. I'm sorry, you all. I put in this video of Patti LaBelle talking about some of the themes that we were mentioning in this video, but I didn't realize that The Breakfast Club has heavy copyright protection, so I ultimately ended up having to remove the video. But I'll put the link in the description for anyone who's interested, and I'll also give you all a general idea of what was said in the video in case you don't want to watch it. Around 3 years ago, Patti LaBelle, Chaka Khan, and Stephanie Mills came to do an interview at The Breakfast Club. They discussed a variety of different topics, but one thing that stood out for me in particular was the fact that Stephanie Mills and Patti LaBelle both felt like in order to get ahead in their career, they needed to get nose jobs. They both go heavily into detail on how no one was really paying attention to them prior to them doing so, and how liberated they felt after they were able to get attention once the procedures were done. They also talk about how common this is in the industry and how everybody in the 80s and 90s was doing it. To my surprise, Charlemagne the God ended up providing a significant amount of pushback, really trying to get them to unpack how they acquiesce to Eurocentric beauty standards. However, from my perspective, Patti and Stephanie didn't really seem to have any regrets doing it, and they also went out of their way to encourage others to do it as well. The interview was strange to me because rather than having some level of self-reflection on what may have informed them to get these kinds of cosmetic surgeries, they take on this very defeatist approach and lean into normalizing people removing their Afrocentric features. And while I'm happy that someone of Patti LaBelle's status and notoriety is willing to come forward and talk about these subjects, I just feel like the way that she handled it was very distasteful to me. I can appreciate the fact that she's willing to have an open and honest conversation about the societal pressures that a lot of Black women in particular have to go through, but I feel like it would have made more sense for her to use this as a moment to push back on these unrealistic expectations that are placed upon them. But instead, she leans into normalizing and encouraging people to repeat the cycle that is plaguing our community. And it's just unfortunate because on average, these conversations are either never had or they're done in poor taste like this. And that's why until people really start addressing the issue, nothing is going to change. And it makes perfect sense as to why our community is in the exact same spot that it was in the 80s, because no one is really willing to unpack why these things are happening. And until they do, it's going to happen generation after generation after generation. In general, I just feel like we've done a very poor job when it comes to pushing back on anti-Black imagery. If anything, I feel like our community plays heavily into it, and that's why we'll continue to see people like Glorilla manifest. In my opinion, I don't really feel like we hold enough space for average-looking people in the same way other communities seem to do. It's like every single time you turn around, if they're Black and they're getting any type of attention, they have to look like Beyonce. And I think that not having a variety of different body types and skin tones only tends to exacerbate the issues around colorism, around featurism, around anti-Blackness. And while Glorilla does have some privileges, ultimately she does not benefit from featurism, nor does she benefit from texturism. The only thing that she has to her advantage is colorism, which puts her in a really odd place because while she's still going to be propped up on a pedestal over darker skinned people, if she has to go head to head with someone like a Rihanna or a Lotto, 9 times out of 10, she's not going to win that battle. What I find really interesting about a lot of people like Glorilla is that they'll have a superiority complex when it comes to darker skinned individuals, but when it comes to people who are within their same skin tone, they exhibit an unusual amount of insecurity. I'm not somebody who really keeps up with Glorilla or stan culture in general, but what I do know is that she doesn't seem to have an issue wielding her proximity to whiteness to try and humble people who may be darker than her. One really good example was her diss track against Young Thug, where she made a lot of references to his skin tone. She went as far to call him burnt, said he looked like dirt under a brick, and even had the audacity to compare him to someone like Whoopi Goldberg. While I find all of the comments that are in this song particularly off-putting, her comparing Whoopi Goldberg to a man was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. As a general standpoint, I'm against anyone referring to a black woman as a man, unless that's something that she requests. But to be a little bit more specific, I'm highly resistant to darker-skinned women being referred to as men. Because of colorism, they have to deal with this issue at a disproportionate rate in comparison to their lighter-skinned counterparts. So anytime I hear people going into that direction, I'm highly resistant to those types of comments. Because kind of like the Cynthia Erivo situation I made my last video on, when we make these types of comments, we reinforce the idea that darker skinned people are naturally more masculine on average, because we don't really see people of Glorilla skin tone being compared to men. It's the Cynthia Erivos, the Serena Williams, the Whoopi Goldbergs, whose womanhood is constantly being up for question. So the fact that she considers herself to be a part of the black community and would wield such an insult towards a darker skinned woman is very distasteful to me. And I just think that she's at an age where she should be more conscious about the types of things that she's saying, whether it's in a lyric or whether it's in person. She should have a higher sense of awareness when it comes to things like colorism. So I don't plan on giving her any types of excuses, nor do I think that is funny. And in general, the fact that she would compare Whoopi Goldberg to someone who she thinks looks like the bottom of someone's shoe or someone that she considers to be burnt really just speaks to her mindset, because Whoopi Goldberg is a very attractive woman. And I understand that it's really hard for people to acknowledge that because of how colorism operates, but nothing about Whoopi Goldberg is unattractive. And if I'm being honest, Whoopi Goldberg in her prime clears Glorilla even with all this cosmetic surgery. Because despite Whoopi Goldberg not necessarily having colorism to her advantage, her facial features and general body proportion are highly more favorable than someone like Glorilla's. So the fact that she's sitting on her high horse when she can barely tolerate what she sees in the mirror is borderline laughable to me. And while we didn't need Glorilla to confirm it, sometimes having people verbalize what we're thinking is happening does feel slightly liberating. Because so often when we have these conversations around colorism or around featurism, people will come online and gaslight you into trying to believe that what you're seeing isn't really what's right in front of you. But the minute they get angry or lose their composure over something that's happening, they will show their true colors. And that's why I feel like it's important to be cautious until you see how people react during confrontation, because that's when you get to really see where people's politics shows up. And a lot of the times when you confront people for their bad behavior, they try to pretend like it's not as serious as it actually is. But if you're going to use something as an insult towards someone else, that means you inherently view what you're describing as negative. Otherwise, you wouldn't have tried to say it to get under this person's skin. Nothing about her behavior recently indicates that she takes pride in her Afrocentric features. So the concept of her being able to appreciate the same features in others seems highly unrealistic to me. I don't have confirmation, but I also think that this photo has a filter on it as well. And I don't think that we talk enough about how filters distort our sense of reality and how they negatively impact how we see ourselves. Being able to slim down your nose or lighten your skin up, while it may seem harmless, it can do a significant amount of damage to each and every person's perception. One thing that I want people to take away from watching this video is that from the very beginning of us being socialized, there is an emphasis on having a certain skin tone, there's an emphasis on having a certain hair texture, there's an emphasis on having a certain eye color. And these are just a small list of things that fall under the category of featurism, colorism, and texturism. People are constantly under the microscope of whether they're too dark, or whether their hair texture is not loose enough, or they don't have a certain level of exoticness that is required to be someone's partner. That ends up breeding a certain level of insecurity in which you acknowledge or you acquiesce to. In the case of Glorilla, it doesn't seem like she plans on doing any self-reflection anytime soon. All I can hope, though, is that she stops before it's too late and really starts to unpack why she felt the need to do these things in the first place. But I think that's all for this one. So if you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and comment, and I will be happy to see you in the next one.